forget to rate our show and subscribe.
Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. So get yourself a pen and paper or open a note-taking app on your phone or computer. Feel free to pause this episode while you get yourself ready. The episode starts at 1 minute and 52 seconds. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. You can text 45645, which is coming in the fall of 2023. In Canada, you can also call 988, the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. The Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. And in the United States, 1-877-565-8860, or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not have to be alone. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations on whose territory I live, work, and play. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections and building on strengths and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a parent of 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. And now, into the episode. Owen, what's up?
What's up in the sky? It's the sun.
This is the next part of my conversation with Melissa Madison. Melissa was Owen's grade 2 teacher. We are discussing practical ways that parents and teachers can work together to navigate the system and how to be more effective advocates. If you want to get more into Melissa's background, go back to part 1. In the previous episode, we discussed topics like how to get the voice of your child into the discussions, stereotypes, why they hurt, and how they manifest in the system that we currently have. And also, we dove into my experience about being held back a grade when I was my son's age and the impact that it had on me. I hope you enjoyed the next part of the episode. Here's a bit of a, because you mentioned early intervention, which I absolutely love, because you and I mean, we're on the same page as far as that goes. But when you have things like, because right now there's a push that, like I look at what Dyslexia BC wants to do and get the early the early interventions in for school, and I'm all for it. Where is there a way to help support that process, I guess, is maybe the word I'm looking for. I'm not sure if I'm asking the right question there. Yeah, like how can a teacher sort of, I guess, promote that side of it as well?
Well, I think with any circumstance, if the parents aren't willing, then there's only so much we can do. Yeah. So we do not have the power to diagnose. We do not have the power to share information, with doctors or counselors or anything like that, unless you've filled out consent forms, all sorts of things, right? So the parent really is, that linchpin to things taking off or not. So early intervention is great, but we also have to remember, okay, how early is early intervention? Well, if it's as early as it should be, it's before they're in the public school system. Yeah. So that all falls on parents, right? Yep. To research and to understand and to get, their doctors on board and things like that. Yeah. But in terms of once they're within the school system, teachers overall are going to be, or should be using what we call universal design. Yeah. So universal design is the idea that the strategies that I'm choosing to teach, to behavior manage, to assess are meeting the needs of 99% of my students, whether they're neurodiverse or not. So if, for instance, having a visual schedule for everyone in the class is helpful for everyone. But it also is super detrimental to that child with autism or anxiety, let's say, that needs to know what's happening throughout the day and when it's happening. So that's a good example. So using universal design is kind of the benchmark for how teachers are teaching, generally meets most needs. That's not always the case, but that's the hope, right? So early intervention then becomes, what kind of additional supports can we get in place for that child? So this is when we often will have, those parent meetings where we're saying, this is what we're noticing, tell me more about this. And then letting the parent know that you will be referring their child to what we call school-based team. And so there's a documentation process that happens for the classroom teacher, and they have to go through all of these steps before school-based team meetings will even be set. So when I say school-based team, I'm talking about classroom teachers, LST, IST, speech and language, counselors that are involved, and administration. So it's basically all of the external, what we call non-enrolling positions within a school setting, outside of just the classroom teacher. So the classroom teacher, part of the process for even just getting a referral into school-based team to be evaluated, we have to have parent meetings. We have to read the child's file from previous years to see what interventions were put in place, what supports were there, if there was any behavior documentation, and so on. We have to do our research and our due diligence as professionals to find out as much as we can about that child before we can even put the paperwork in to have school-based team then look at all of it too. So, where the public school system falls very short on early intervention is just how underfunded and the crisis of not having enough specialist teachers and early intervention people even available. So sure, we offer speech and language pathologists, but that one individual is stretched between 5 schools and only has one service day at your child's school per week, and they have a caseload of 200 students just at that one site who need servicing. So you're lucky if your child is able to access that service once a month. So then we fall incredibly short. So getting, if you can, if you have benefits and access to outside agencies or private support, even though those wait lists are also usually quite expensive too. Right. And there's so many systemic issues that, cause these barriers, but so early intervention is key. However, there's a lot of barriers around actually having it happen once the child is within the school system.
Well, and it was funny because in the notes that you and I made for talking about this, like the question that you wrote down, thinking about your experience, what barriers existed for you / your child as you navigated the public school system, that was certainly one of them. And I remember meeting with the SPT, which is just the acronym for school-based team. And we couldn't afford to go private. Again, the wait list is ridiculously long, and especially with what happened with us at Sunny Hill, like, come on. And God knows we didn't want to have a repeat of what happened when he was 4 years old. But then trying to get things like a psych ed, we'll put him on the wait list, and then hearing from one of the psychologists that they could do an autism assessment, but he's way down on the priority list, and realizing that the only thing on the priority list is actually the kids who are really aggressive. Like, no. And how many psych eds does the school district do a year? I got quoted, and I will not say who, but they quoted me 4. I've heard some districts do 2. And I'm like, this is pathetic. I
would dispute that, because I've known certain school sites that I've worked at that that have several 8, 9, 10 psych eds done in a school year. It doesn't seem like much, but again, when the only person who could administer a psych ed is the district psychologist who's serving the entire district, the wait lists are insane, right?
Yeah, they are.
And it's also a multi-day process. So there's that too.
Yeah. And that's, those are the barriers that I found that getting to like the things that you had set up, or getting to the principal or whoever the LST was, or IST, or any of those, that piece isn't so difficult. But trying to trigger a mechanism that's going to get your kid more support, that is where it's really, I find, that's where I think the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
And that is what makes it really tough. And there was a meeting I was in yesterday with a government official, and they had asked the group for, solutions and such. And the way that they came up with this, the way that they were looking for solutions from all these advocates that were in this meeting, it was almost like, here's a solution. Oh, okay, thank you very much. But when it came to, I guess the word would be, maybe implementing it or seeing what the realistic side of that might be. Oh, we don't like that solution. Well, what do you want? Like, that is the frustrating piece, that bureaucracy gets in the way of that. And it shouldn't take 4 years to get a dyslexia test or a psych ed or anything like that. It shouldn't do that. And it shouldn't, if somebody's got extended benefits and they're able to afford it, I'm very happy for them. I truly, honestly am. Some families like us, we're not able to afford that. And that's a big deal. We didn't find a barrier in terms of the attitude of things, the stereotypes and stuff, but more in just trying to get the answers that we wanted more than anything else.
So I wanted to touch on what you were talking about around the bureaucracy and the systemic kind of barriers and shortcomings that kind of make the process for diagnosis and early intervention troublesome. And obviously I need to be, careful about kind of how I phrase, this next answer, I guess, to one of the questions around kind of shortcomings and things like that, because I really do believe in the public school system, and I've seen year after year after year, dedicated staff working to support students, even with all of these systemic shortcomings that hinder our process. But I will say that the kind of the number one barrier up against really anybody, whether it's a family with a neurodivergent child or not, is just the consistent underfunding of the public education system, right? So, people, there's a cliche around, teachers begging for more money for the public school system, right? And that's, they've been crying for that for years. And, the government just pushed 1 point whatever million into this school district, and it's distorted. It is so incredibly distorted. If we think of even just what the salary of one speech and language pathologist would be, and you want that, one person to service 2,000 children across multiple school sites, right? Like, it just, I don't think people realize that, you ultimately you put money where you care about things, right? So you put time, you put effort, you put money where you care. And so, I'm not saying that the government doesn't care per se, but what I am saying is that I don't think that they recognize, and therefore how it's portrayed in the media, how it's portrayed to the people that are not in the system working it with these shortcomings and underfunding, that it's framed in a way that makes the public education system look greedy, look ungrateful per se. But I don't think that there's an understanding truly of where funding goes and how it's allocated. And so, if we're up against those things already, just underfunding, that has a direct effect on support hours that EAs give and jobs that are posted. often districts will, get so many designations that generate X amount of funding. And instead of that going directly to your child, it's allocated to the school as a whole.
Yep.
So then the administration and the IST teams and LST teams, that whole school-based team then goes, okay, whose highest needs, and reallocates the hours and the funding that your child brought in. And it's not necessarily going to them. Right. So as a parent going, okay, we've gone through this whole process, years of process to get this diagnosis, to get this designation within the public school system. What do you mean my child does not have an EA from Bell to Bell? What do you mean they're just getting support in the mornings? So there's so many pieces and so many moving pieces. And again, I will say that the staff within the school does everything they can to make do with what we're given, but we're given scraps at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Well, and I mean, I think the other thing too is that, I mean, that's a pretty good explanation in terms of, the things that, do happen and should happen, but the schools and the districts don't exactly publicize where the money goes or what they don't, that's not talked about. No. The management of it per se. I also find that, and again, in the meeting that I had yesterday, where with the government official, the attitude that I get, and I mean, this is not just a yesterday thing. This is a in general thing. Is we've put in X amount of millions of dollars. Fantastic. It gets a "what have you done for me lately" attitude, which is not the case. And it's also, I think, a very defensive thing. We're going to make an investment of 22 million in this, and it's going to bring us this and this and this. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Way to go. Is this going to solve this problem? No. Okay. Yeah, I understand that we have to expand, but we still have this problem over here. What are we doing?
Yes, and that brings me almost directly to the second major issue that the public school system is up against, which is basically the disconnect between the network of policymakers and the ones who are actually on the ground running school. Right. So what I like to say is that, the policymakers and the people that are in charge of making decisions about financial allocations, about new programs, about hiring, all of that stuff, educational policy in general, they are stuck with what I like to call the balcony view. Right. So they're looking, at things a very generalized sense, right? Going, okay, this program should hypothetically be funded by this 20 million that we're investing.
Yeah.
Okay, but when we actually look at how it's going to run on the dance floor, if you will, with the people who are actually working the dance floor, doing the movements, working with what the, the balcony viewers are viewing, but they're actually in it, going, okay, so this 20 million that you're saying is going to be allocated to this program, which is, built to support our neurodiverse learners. But when you bring it down in actuality, it goes, okay, this was enough money to hire a manager and only 2 workers that need to run a program within this ratio. For safety reasons. And so they can only run it with this funding. If you want this program to last for 4 years, they can only run it once a week or once a month. Right. So when you actually break down the numbers, it's all so skewed. Right. And that idea of what have you done for me lately? And it's like, aren't children at the very foundation of what we should be investing in and building up, right? Like if
and the prevention
are becoming adults and we're supposed to be building citizens of the world.
Yeah.
So you think that that's where we should be investing, right? Like,
and not only that, I mean, taking it a step further, you look at again, I'll just pick on dyslexia, just because it's on the front of my mind when I think about it. But treating getting ahead of dyslexia at preschool or kindergarten is going to save that person's life in, when they get into high school or after, if they even make it through high school. And that's a big, big, big deal, because people that do drop out that are dyslexic, they, a lot of them will suffer. And they'll end up on the street. They'll end up on social assistance because they can't read that. They can't. They didn't have anybody advocating for that change, or the things are how they are now. And you find a good teacher like you, and maybe somebody will get lucky.
Well, and I think it's reading is about it's equity. Yeah. Right? Like it's the license to be successful in the world. And so it makes it so complicated to do early intervention when we don't have the tools to do early intervention. Right? So it's all, there's so much at work that makes the system challenging. And, people would think, oh, well, that's a very grandiose statement to say that a child with dyslexia will end up on the streets. Well, it's not, though. That's the thing, because it's access to the world. Being able to read and write is access to the world. It's access to information, right? Yeah. And so there are a ton of statistics around, that basically they say that by the end of grade 3, if a child is not reading at what is established at grade level expectations, that their rate of success just goes down by such a significant amount. And I can't quote the numbers exactly because I can't remember them, but the studies, show that basically by that end of grade 3, that is the dictating point of success for a child's academics and dropout rates in high school and all of those things. So what you speak of is so real, and not some false narrative or some victimhood mentality that, oh, well, if we don't support this child, he's going to be homeless and on the street. No, it's a very real possibility, because reading and writing is access, right? So if we're not providing access, then yes, statistically saying that child is up against so much more. And by the end of grade 3. So if a child is not reading or writing within that grade level expectation by then, that already dictates their success as a 17-year-old in grade 12 if they make it that far.
Yeah. Right? And maybe that needs to be broken down a bit more, because you're saying, they're not able to read by grade 3, but read, I think, at some level, or write at some level. It's not that anybody's going to be fully proficient at reading or writing by grade 3. Like, right. No.
And that's why I say, according to grade level expectations, right? Yeah. So however the government has coined that success marker, that's what they use to determine.
The conversation comes to a conclusion in the next and final episode. Looking ahead, we discuss closing the episode and wrapping up our discussion. We both give a summary of practical tips for parents and teachers, reminding ourselves to always engage the student's voice and never assume you think you know what's best. And then we end with some fun word association. I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to our show.
If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD Family.
See you soon for a new episode. I have 3 things to ask of you. Number 1, if you have any comments, questions, or guest ideas, please leave a comment on the Facebook page. Number 2, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people find us. And number 3, if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated. Any medical information on this site and podcast is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient-physician relationship and should not be used as a substitute for a professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or guidance about a specific medical condition. The show, host, and its guests expressly disclaim responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site or show. By visiting this site and listening to this show, you agree to the terms and conditions, which may from time to time change or be supplemented by the show host.